European bison has moved a step back from the brink of extinction. The largest land mammal was almost wiped out by hunting and deforestation. Its recovery is now being regarded as a conservation success story. Take a look.
In the remote mountains of southern Romania, the forest was fading. Centuries of logging, farming, and hunting had stripped the land, and little by little, everything wild disappeared. Meadows dried up, animals were gone, and what used to be a lively ecosystem turned into a quiet, empty stretch of land. Then, in 2014, a group of conservationists took a bold step. They brought back European bison, huge animals that hadn't been seen there for over 200 years. Back in 2009, only 11 bison lived in the park. Since then, that number has grown to 33. Most people didn't think it would work. The bison were massive and rough on the land, and the terrain wasn't easy. Even the scientists had their doubts. Still, they went ahead with it. Then, just a year later, something unexpected started to happen. What came next changed the way people looked at rewilding for good. The slow collapse of a giant. Long before cities covered Europe, the European bison, also called wisent, roamed freely from the forests of France to the mountains near the Caucasus. These big plant-eating animals played a key role in shaping the land. As they grazed, they spread seeds, cleared space, and helped balance the ecosystems around them. But their time as rulers of the wild wouldn't last forever. The fall of the European bison wasn't sudden. It happened bit by bit over hundreds of years. As humans built towns and farms, nature was pushed aside. Forests were cut down, land was divided up, and the space bison once used to roam began to vanish. By the Middle Ages, they'd already been forced into the few quiet forests still untouched. Farming and growing towns kept pushing them out. Deforestation wasn't just happening in one area, it was changing the whole continent. It broke apart the big, connected wild spaces that large animals like the bison depended on. But somehow, they managed to survive, hanging on in the forests that had been left alone. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Along with trains and factories came guns, tools that tipped the scale. Where hunting bison had once taken skill and teamwork, now it only took a gun. In the 1700s and 1800s, bison were hunted even more, not just for meat or hides, but for sport and pride. Nobles and soldiers saw them as trophies. The last places where bison still lived became more and more exposed. The worst damage came during World War I. As war broke out across Europe, nature suffered too. The Białowieża forest in Poland, home to the last wild bison, became both a battleground and a place to find food. German soldiers, driven by hunger, shot almost every bison left. By the end of the war, only 9 remained, and they were soon lost in the mess that followed. By 1927, the worst had happened. The European bison was gone from the wild. Just 54 were left, all living in captivity. And in that silence, a quiet question started to grow. Could these last few animals, the descendants of a lost world, help bring the wild back? After the last European bison in the wild was killed in 1927, the species came terrifyingly close to being wiped out for good. The only ones left were in captivity, mostly in zoos, with a few in private reserves. Altogether, there were just 54 left. And of those, only 12 had strong enough genetics to rebuild the population. These bison had been removed from the wild for years, and no one knew if they could ever survive out there again. But even with the odds stacked against them, scientists believed it was still worth trying. In the early 1930s, conservationists began setting up carefully planned breeding programs. These started in places like Poland, Germany, and Russia. Because so few bison remained, every single birth mattered. Each animal had to be watched closely. Breeders kept detailed notes to prevent inbreeding and to make sure the bison stayed as healthy as they could. This type of genetic planning was brand new at the time, and it ended up laying the foundation for how endangered species are saved today. In 1932, things took a big step forward with the founding of the International Society for the Protection of the European Bison. This group brought together scientists, vets, and conservationists from different countries. Even with political tension and war looming in Europe, the work to save the bison kept going. The mission was simple but incredibly important. Protect the animals, help the population grow, and hold on to as much genetic diversity as possible. By the 1960s and 70s, the population in captivity had grown steadily. Bison were living in large, fenced areas, forest parks, and protected zones. But as their numbers increased, a bigger, harder question emerged. Could these animals ever go back to the wild? And if they did, what might that mean for the damaged landscapes across Europe? As scientists dug deeper, they began to realize just how deeply connected the bison were to the health of the land itself. European bison aren't just big, grass-eating animals. They're what ecologists call a keystone species, meaning they shape the entire ecosystem by just going about their daily routines. As they walk and graze, they eat down shrubs and grasses, clear paths through the woods, spread seeds on their fur and in their droppings, and naturally fertilize the soil. Their movements help everything from tiny bugs and birds to small mammals and wildflowers. Without bison, whole areas of forest and meadow started to suffer. Overgrowth blocked sunlight, wildflowers vanished, insects and pollinators lost their homes. Slowly, the land fell silent, no longer the lively, ever-changing place it once was. That's when a powerful idea started to take shape. What if bison didn't need to stay behind fences? What if they were part of the solution to fixing what was broken? That idea would spark something big. The goal was no longer just saving a species, it was using that species to help bring nature itself back to life. Releasing bison into Europe's wilderness. For decades, scientists had done everything they could to protect European bison in captivity. But by the early 2000s, it was clear that keeping them alive behind fences wasn't enough anymore. The next chapter was rewilding, letting these animals return to the places they had once disappeared from and giving them the chance to live wild again. It was a bold idea. Rewilding wouldn't just test whether the bison could survive on their own again. It would also test if they could help bring Europe's damaged landscapes back to life. No country took this challenge more seriously than Romania. At the heart of it all was a wild, rugged place called the Țarcu Mountains, deep in the southern Carpathians of western Romania. This region had once been home to wild bison, but for more than 200 years, none had walked its slopes. Though rich in wildlife, the land had been badly damaged by people. Years of overgrazing by livestock, illegal logging, and the breakdown of traditional farming had left behind long stretches of weakened land. Meadows had become tangled and wild. Forests had lost their balance. Native plants and animals were disappearing. In many ways, it had become what conservationists call a wilderness desert, a place that looks natural but no longer works like a healthy ecosystem. Locals have their own name for it: the dying forest. Rewilding Europe, a non-profit focused on bringing back nature across the continent, teamed up with WWF Romania to try something that had never been done at this scale. They chose the Țarcu Mountains for the largest wild bison reintroduction project in all of Europe. The goal wasn't just to bring back the animals, it was to let them help heal the land itself. If it worked, it would show how rewilding could help fix the damage caused by centuries of human use and overuse. But this wasn't just about opening a gate and letting animals go. The terrain was tough, remote, hilly, and without much support. There were no fences, few solid roads, and hardly any nearby vet care. The local communities, full of culture and tradition, hadn't lived with wild bison in generations. Some villagers worried the animals would damage crops, hurt someone, or take food from their livestock. Others questioned whether turning loose such massive creatures was really a good idea. There was fear, hesitation, and real concern about how it might all go. Scientists had their doubts too. No one knew how the bison would respond after such a long journey. Would they settle in? Would they wander too far? Could the land even support them? Or would they struggle and die? On top of that, there was the issue of limited genetic diversity. If something went wrong, it could take years to recover. But still, the goal stayed the same: bring back the bison and let them help revive the land. Having the dream was one thing, making it happen would be something else entirely. What came next was the hardest part: turning vision into action. Planning had been bold, but pulling it off was tougher. Making the leap from theory to a real, breathing herd meant solving problem after problem, one step at a time. How rewilding teams brought bison back to Romania. Turning the dream of rewilding into something real took more than just letting animals loose in the mountains. It took years of planning, teamwork across countries, and careful step-by-step work to bring bison back to Romania's southern Carpathians. The people behind it had to think like scientists, vets, engineers, and community workers, all at the same time. Nothing could be left to chance. From the health of the bison to the land they were entering, every detail mattered. The first task was selecting the right bison. Rewilding Europe and WWF Romania worked with breeding centers and wildlife parks all across the continent to find animals with the strongest genetics. Bison came from Sweden, Germany, Poland, Italy, and a few other countries. Many of the bison traveled for days by truck to reach their new home. Before the journey, each animal went through vet checks to make sure they were healthy, free of disease, and strong enough to handle the long trip. Moving a 1,700-pound animal isn't simple. Each one had to be gently loaded into custom containers, given breaks to rest, and watched closely for any signs of stress along the way. Once they arrived in Romania, the bison weren't let loose right away. Instead, they were placed in soft-release enclosures, large, fenced-off areas where they could slowly adjust to the local climate, terrain, and food. This adjustment phase was key. It gave the bison a chance to settle in, while also letting scientists study how they were doing. Were they eating enough? How were they reacting to the new environment? Before release, each bison was fitted with a GPS collar. These collars were vital for tracking where they went, how far they roamed, and making sure they didn't wander into risky areas like villages or roads. Monitoring teams used satellite data to watch the herds, spot feeding grounds, and respond quickly if any problems came up. Field rangers, trained in wildlife behavior, kept daily logs, watching for changes in eating habits, group dynamics, and signs of illness or stress. Involving local communities was just as important as managing the animals. To build trust, the rewilding team partnered with nearby villages. Locals were hired as wildlife monitors, rangers, and guides. Schools were visited, public meetings were held, and everyone was invited to learn more about the project. People shared what they knew about the land, the seasons, and how animals behaved. Over time, many started seeing the bison not as a danger, but as something to be proud of. Some even began to see tourism potential. The first official release happened in May 2014. 17 bison stepped onto wild Romanian land for the first time in over 2 centuries. It was a proud moment, but also a nervous one. Would the bison adapt? Would the land respond? Could this fragile hope hold up in the real world? No one knew. Early signs were mixed. Some of the bison had trouble adjusting. Others did well. The team stayed cautious and released another group in 2015. Setbacks, skeptics, and a faint light of hope. Though the bison reintroduction in Romania started with excitement and thoughtful planning, the early years were anything but smooth. As soon as the animals were released, reality hit, and it wasn't easy. Survival in the Carpathians wasn't guaranteed, and support from the public began to wobble. Behind the hopeful headlines and pictures of bison in the forest were quiet doubts, hard days, and pressure to show that this wasn't just a nice idea. It had to work. The challenges started almost right away. Some of the bison didn't make it. The stress from transport, the strange new land, and unfamiliar food took a toll. Several bison got sick, and some didn't survive. These early losses raised real questions. Was the Tsarku Mountains area really ready for a large, free-roaming herd? The land was broken up by old roads, scattered farms, and an unpredictable climate, all of which made life tough for animals not used to such conditions. On top of that, technical problems started to pile up. The GPS collars, which had been a key part of tracking the herds, began to fail. Some lost signal, others had battery issues, and a few just stopped working. Without solid data, rangers had a harder time keeping up with the bison. Scientists couldn't say for sure if the animals were adapting or if they were silently struggling. Community concerns also began to grow. Some villagers, already worried about how bison might affect farmland or livestock, became uneasy when they heard reports of bison getting close to homes. Rumors spread, some exaggerated, others completely false, that the animals were wrecking fences or harming crops. Then came funding problems. A project this size needed steady support over the long haul. But as early issues added up, some donors and partners started to back off. Conservationists feared the effort might slow down or even collapse before the herd had time to settle. Some people lost patience. Others questioned whether the project was still a good idea at all. And yet, in the middle of all that worry, something quietly changed. In late 2015, field teams started to notice unexpected signs. The herd was settling down. They were sticking together, foraging in groups, and showing clearer signs of adjusting to life in the wild. Then came the moment that stopped everyone in their tracks. A ranger spotted a pregnant female. It was almost too good to believe. No bison had been born in the wild here for over 2 centuries. Scientists had worried the animals wouldn't survive long enough, wouldn't adjust, and wouldn't breed. Some feared that years in captivity had erased their instincts. But a year after that release, the unthinkable happened. A wild calf was born in the Carpathians. That calf wasn't just a step forward, it was a breakthrough, a sign that this might really work. And when the news spread, even the strongest critics went quiet. The herd grows. What came next in the months and years after that birth was a slow, steady shift. The herd began to grow, more in number, more in confidence, and more in stability. Starting in 2016, new bison were released each year. Each one was chosen for its genetics, carefully selected from breeding centers across Europe to keep the population strong and diverse. Nature responds. The forest floor comes back to life. As the bison settled deeper into the southern Carpathians, something strange and beautiful began to happen. It wasn't just that the animals were making it. It was that the land itself, long damaged, thinned out, and quiet, had begun to wake up again. At first, the changes were slow, but then they became clear. Bison are what scientists call ecosystem engineers. Just by living, walking, grazing, rolling, digging, they reshape the environment. Conservationists knew this on paper, but few believed the effects would be visible this soon. Many still doubted that a small herd could really shift an entire landscape. Could they really make a difference? Could their presence do more good than harm? Then came the proof, quietly from the ground up. Soil tests and camera footage started to reveal changes. The thick, tangled underbrush that had once blocked out sunlight was clearing in places. As bison moved through, they created open patches, letting light reach the forest floor again. In these gaps, wildflowers and native grasses began to grow back. Their hooves broke up the packed dirt, allowing air and rain to reach deeper roots. When bison rolled or wallowed in the soil, they accidentally made perfect beds for seeds to sprout. Some of those seeds even hitched a ride in their fur or were dropped in their dung. Soon after, researchers recorded a noticeable rise in plant variety. Botanists found wildflowers and herbs growing in places that had once been smothered by single grass species or thick invasive brush. Birds returned too. Ground nesters like the Eurasian woodlark and tawny pipit began using the new meadows for breeding. Pollinators followed, drawn by the growing mix of blooming plants. Small mammals like hares and foxes reappeared, foraging in the fresh clearings. And with the return of prey came larger predators. Camera traps began picking up more sightings of wolves and even lynx. The land itself was healthier. Soil samples showed richer structure, higher organic matter, and better carbon storage. Water ran off more slowly. Erosion dropped. In some valleys, even the weather became a little more stable thanks to the growing plant cover. What amazed people most wasn't just the science, it was the speed. Just a few years earlier, this land had been called a dying forest, stripped of its key species and natural balance. Now, with the bison back, the Carpathians were visibly and measurably coming back to life. Locals who had once worried about safety or crop damage began sharing stories. Meadows lit up with wildflowers, birdsong where there had been silence, and emotional moments of seeing bison calves grazing beside their mothers. In the years that followed, proof turned into progress. The Southern Carpathians transformed into the most successful wild bison recovery site in Europe. The wild expands. With the ecosystem thriving and the herd growing strong, the Carpathians' rewilding effort hit a turning point. By 2022, what began as a high-risk conservation trial had become a global model, proof that, with enough care and time, nature really can heal itself. And the healing wasn't just about plants growing or animals returning, it was about the future of the entire European bison species. In 2022, scientists ran a genetic study comparing wild-born bison in Romania to those brought in from breeding centers across Europe. The results were incredible. Genetic diversity, once the biggest threat to survival, was now stable. Inbreeding was dropping, and the gene pool was growing deeper. What was once a fragile, hand-managed population had become self-sustaining. The wild wasn't just a place to survive, it had become a place to thrive. By 2023, Rewilding Europe and WWF Romania shifted their focus. It was no longer just about increasing numbers. It was about connecting habitats and expanding territory. With communities more engaged than ever and strong public support, the work reached new heights. Between 2023 and 2024, over 11 calves were born in the wild. At the same time, the bison began exploring far beyond their original release areas. By mid-2024, they had expanded their range to over 370 square kilometers. In September 2023, camera traps captured bison in Domogled Valea Cerni National Park, a neighboring protected area. This was a major moment, the first time bison had crossed a safe corridor on their own, helping reconnect Romania's broken wildlands. To protect this momentum, new agreements were signed with Redizat and Domogled National Parks. These opened up 105,000 hectares of protected space, not just for bison, but also for lynx, wolves, red deer, and more. Together, these parks now form one of the largest connected wilderness zones in Europe. Then came another surprise: climate impact. A Yale-led study found that 170 bison across just 48 square kilometers were capturing over 54,000 tons of CO2 every year, the same as taking 43,000 cars off the road. Simply by grazing and fertilizing, the bison were turning damaged soil into living carbon sinks. By late 2024, with the population nearing 210 individuals, the Southern Carpathians had done the impossible. They became home to Europe's largest truly wild bison herd, genetically strong, ecologically vital, and deeply embraced by local culture. What started as a last-ditch effort to save a species became something bigger, a new way to think about nature. The wild didn't just return in numbers, it came back in spirit, and that may be Europe's greatest environmental miracle. What do you think about this rewilding project? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for watching. See you next time.